We're going to be talking about mental imagery today. Now, mental imagery is by far and away one of the most important factors in really shaving down the amount of anxiety that you feel and doing it in a relatively short space of time. Now, your mental imagery are the pictures, visualizations, and the images that you have in your mind. So they're the things that you picture on a day-to-day basis. Now, the reason this is important is because the brain speaks in the language of pictures. So for every thought that you have, even if you're not conscious of it, there will be an associated mental imagery that comes with it. Now, for many of us, we're completely unconscious of this mental visualization process until we really slow things down and we start to pay more closer attention to it. Now, mental imagery at a basic level comes down to where you are putting your focus. Now, the majority of people, by the time they reach me on this program, have been habitually training themselves to focus on what they don't want to happen. Now, the way this may play out is we'll show you through an example. Let's say you have a team building day coming up. So there's a team building event at the end of the week. And in the days building up to it, you start to think to yourself, oh, I hope I'm not feeling anxious for the event. Or I'm worried that I'm going to be anxious on the day. I'm really concerned that anxiety is going to ruin the day for me and I'm not going to be able to enjoy it. I'm scared if I get anxious on the day, people are going to notice and people are going to be looking at me and that's going to make my anxiety worse. I'm feeling anxious because I really don't want to work with the boss. I'm feeling anxious because Kevin over in Department X makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable and if I just really don't want to be in his team. Now, I hope you can appreciate that in all of the examples that I just talked through, my focus was on what I don't want to happen. So I'm focusing on the problems, I'm focusing on the obstacles, and I'm focusing on what I don't want to feel. Now, if we come back to that original idea about mental imagery, so the brain speaks in the language of pictures. For every single one of those thoughts that I just talked through, your brain has a mental representation of what that would look like. Okay, now this doesn't mean you're going to be conscious of it. It doesn't mean you're going to have an image flash up inside your mind. Sometimes you may do. But your brain will have a visual image of the thought that you were just running through your head. And what happens then is as the brain registers the mental imagery, it then creates all of the chemicals, all of the hormones that match the mental imagery that you've just created. So what happens is you think about what you don't want to happen. You create a scary image of that nightmare scenario. Your brain registers the image, creates all the chemicals that match the image that then lead you to feel as if the image is happening now. Because what the brain research shows is that your brain really doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. So when you are imagining things, your brain will create the chemicals to match what happens. So in our example, maybe one of the things that I said was, I really hope I'm not anxious on the day. So in that process, in order to have that thought, I create the mental imagery of me being anxious at work on the day. My brain registers it, and then I start to feel anxious. Now, if I'm aware of it, I can actually start to connect to the imagery that I have. But if it's been such a habit, if you've been doing it for such a long time and it's now automatic, you probably won't have these flashing up images. It'll just be happening behind the scenes. And because your brain will duly create the chemicals to match whatever you're thinking about, and it will match whatever you're focusing on, you start to create these feelings of anxiety based on the scary pictures that you create. So this is a huge contributor to not only the start of anxiety happening, but also to it perpetuating and exacerbating, because often one thought leads to another. So one scary thought leads to another, one scary image leads to another. And what happens over time is that you create all of these scary images that your brain then feels overwhelmed by. It's creating all of these anxiety creating chemicals, and then you get stuck feeling overwhelmed and not sure what to do about it. How do we change this? The first thing that we need to do is appreciate that we can't change anything that we're not aware of. And we also know that a stressed brain doesn't learn. Okay, so when you're in that situation, if you first of all notice yourself feeling anxious, then you want to be thinking about, okay, what am I picturing? What is the thought that is going through my head, and what is the visual representation I've created? Once you've done that, you've moved to a position of observer. This slightly detaches you from the emotion of the moment, but most importantly, it moves you a position of observer. And when you're observing the imagery that you're creating, this then gives you an opportunity to do something about it. Now, we think about that primary problem of negative self-talk. If you first of all notice that you're starting to create and focus on what you don't want, first of all, rather than beating yourself up and saying, oh, I'm focusing on what I don't want again, we want to turn that into a congratulations that you've noticed it. So our first step is to congratulate yourself on noticing that you've been focusing on what you don't want. Our second part of the process is to then acknowledge that you've noticed it. So some people will do a little click. Some people will just do a little clap. Some people will just in their head go, I've done it. What we want to do is almost create a little alarm for yourself that helps you to register when you've done it. So you notice it, and then you give yourself a little acknowledgement that you've done it, which further detaches you from it and helps you to acknowledge that you've done the most important part of the process, which is noticing you've done it. And then finally, we want you to take whatever that mental imagery is and to then create a crystal clear picture of what you do want to happen. So create a crystal clear picture in your mind of what you do want to happen, how you do want to go, and how you do want to be feeling. The benefits of this is that you create this mental imagery, and then your brain registers the imagery and then starts to create the chemicals that match the new imagery. So I'm not by any way saying just because you create a picture of what you want to happen, it will automatically happen. What I am saying is that when you create that mental imagery, your brain creates the chemistry as if that is happening. And I'm sure you'll agree you're in a much better position to problem solve when you're feeling calm and balanced compared to when you're feeling anxious and you're feeling stressed. So regardless of if it goes perfectly to plan or if there are some challenges involved, your chemistry will be in a much more balanced, much more neutral, much more calm place, which will allow you to deal with it. Now, this is very much a process. And what you'll probably find is sometimes you'll just miss it, and then you'll start feeling a bit anxious, and then later on you'll capture it. And then the more you practice it, so the more you're consciously aware of it, the quicker you get at noticing it. The quicker that you get at noticing it, the quicker you can shift your focus to what you do want. And then all of a sudden the time window for anxiety to sort of develop starts to shrink. It starts to get smaller and smaller. And over time, it becomes such a small window that you can almost snap yourself out of it before it even gets going. And this is a really, really powerful tool, and it's just observing where your focus is and then creating by using your inbuilt imagery system to focus on what you do want. So mental imagery is something that is going to take some time, take some practice. So treat it as a game, treat it as something that you're building, you're developing. And when you've mastered it, it'll make a huge difference to how you think and to how you feel.